morning, fellow members and friends. Two very important statements that I'm going to make at the very outset. I noticed that in looking at the schedule, or I don't know whether you call it schedule, whatever. Anyway, the times. Morning tea is written with a great stroke, much larger than first session or session following. So it is quite obvious what is important to New Zealanders. But that I discovered while I was living in Australia, the importance of morning tea. So don't worry, we will have that. The other statement with regard to the timetable is that all times are approximate. I'll end a session when I feel like ending a session. How's that? And you can entertain yourselves appropriately. But generally we will start the sessions that are there. Now, following on from that, this is, while it's billed as a seminar, I'm not going to talk ad infinitum, ad nauseam. Anything that deals with creative imagination means that you have to do some imagining. And so a great part of this is participatory. And there is paper up here, plenty of paper. There are even boards on which you can rest the paper so that you don't have to write on your knees. And there are pencils. And a great part of the program is going to be participatory. And the more you participate in it, the more you really participate in it and take on, oh, she's got more paper, or, oh, those are the things that I don't really need them just yet, B, so in between times I'll pick them up, yes. The more that you really give yourself to it, I think the more benefit you will receive from it. So with those preliminary comments, anyone who wants to leave now may do so. Making you work. Now, really my main concern in this, and the title I really had chosen with another title, but this is what it ended up, Intuition and the Creative Imagination. My real main concern is how we know what we know. As Theosophists, we think we know a great deal. And often we come to Theosophy and read it diligently, study it, try to understand it. But what do we really know? And how do we know? What are the modes of knowing? So rather than leap at once into a discussion of intuition, and Theosophy has a great deal to say about intuition, of course, and we all think we know what it is, I suggest we approach the subject somewhat indirectly and see if we can open ourselves in a variety of ways to come to know whether whatever it is we think we know, do we really know it? We've all been trained, at least if we've been educated in the Western world, in the rational mode of thinking or knowing. We've been taught to analyze, to examine parts. And today we are pretty much convinced that the scientific mode of knowing is the most accurate and obviously the best. Science has become the great myth of our time. And I call it a myth because it is a story. It's a story, and a myth is a story. Just as religion was the great myth of 15th century Europe, so today, in the end of the 20th century, science is our story. It's the myth. We're constantly adding to it. We put bits and pieces on it, and we change bits and pieces of the story. But that's our story, and most of us are stuck with it. We may not even realize the extent to which we've been influenced by the scientific approach. For us, trained, as I say, in the Western mode of thinking, a statement is either true or it's not true. All right? I give you a statement, it's either true or false. The thing is what it is, and not something else. And yet, if we've been trained in other modes of thinking, statements can be both true and not true. And we're beginning to learn that in contemporary physics, for example. Light, the most obvious example. Light is both wave and particle. So it's both this and both that. And there are other ways of reasoning, of thinking, and we'll look at some of those. So when it comes to a study of theosophy, we're very inclined to say that theosophy is rational, that it's reasonable, that it's inherently logical, and it makes sense. Now, I've always planned to write a book, and probably it'll be the very end of the incarnation so that I can bow out before people discover what I've done. But I'd like to write a book about the sense and nonsense of theosophy. Because there's a lot of things that are nonsense. They're not nonsense, not irrational, but not rational either. And I think we need to explore all of that realm. Consider for a moment how many modes of knowing there may be. Just for the present purpose, this thing echoes like mad. Can you hear me? Yes. Sound like sleep. I'm going to suggest that in one sense there are two main modes of knowing. There's unconscious knowing, and there's conscious knowing. We'll look at this.
I think this one might work too.
That work better? All right, fine. Consider, for example, in unconscious knowing, how we operate this amazing mechanism of the physical body. You don't have to really think about whether you're breathing, but I hope all of you are breathing. Anyone stops breathing, that's a danger sign. I think, isn't it, Charles? It's a danger sign. Yeah. So don't stop breathing, at least not while you're here. Makes a mess. But just consider, I presume you all had some kind of breakfast this morning. And the internal organs are busy about digesting and assimilating and doing all kinds of things. Their business, that's about their business, isn't that right? You haven't directed stomach juices to do this or that. I don't know too much about physiology anymore. I studied it once. Anyway, you know. All of that is unconscious knowing. The body has its own knowing. It can do an amazing number of things. If I want to write on the board, I don't have to consciously think, now which area of the brain operates this muscle that's going to lift this arm and going to hold this pen and put it to the board. I do it. I do it automatically. Now the thing is, there's an awful lot of other unconscious knowing. They're all the sensations to which we respond. That doesn't work much either. See what this one does. To which we respond. You respond to heat and cold automatically. The physical body has an amazing range, doesn't it, in terms of temperature that it can respond to. Consider how much of your knowing is unconscious, that just carries on, just goes on. In many ways, a large part of our unconscious knowing is also what we can call we'll just call it at the psychic level. I'm not going to get psychic here, but I'm talking about at the psyche, that emotional mental component that really doesn't, what shall I say, that takes over in an amazing different ways. For example, when you get into a crowd of people, do you automatically, without thinking, feel uncomfortable or move away from certain people and feel more comfortable with other people? There's a kind of atmosphere, isn't there, to which we respond. So there's a kind of cellular knowing, organic knowing, and also a kind of psychic knowing. You can put in this area too, if you like, rather than body, let's say an organic knowing. And here, let's also say memory. From the point of view that if you want to remember something, you file it away, and the brain has an incredible ability to somehow bring up that memory. It's a kind of filing system, isn't it? If you considered that. We don't pay much attention to this kind of knowing. And yet it's very pervasive. Probably a more pervasive aspect of experience than is ordinarily accepted. Then there's conscious knowing. And I'm going to divide that, for convenience sake, into conceptual knowing and contextual knowing. We're going to do a little experiment in a moment on this. We're conscious of certain concepts, ideas, and we examine them. An idea is presented to you, and you examine it. This is examining concepts. And you really have to work at it sometimes. You really have to think about it, don't you? Sometimes you know something You may not know it directly, but you know it in context. So that in one sense then, it's conceptual and contextual knowing. Now, why is this important? Why is this important? There's also, incidentally, a knowing by doing. There's conscious knowing by doing. You can contrast two individuals faced with putting together some gadget. One person reads the directions very, very carefully, lays out all the parts, reads the directions, and proceeds step by step. The other person looks at all the parts, looks at the picture of the whole, and by doing it, never reads the directions, achieves the end result. All right? Which one are you? I had a very close friend, Crotona, who said, when all else fails, read the directions. She was absolutely convinced that directions got in her way. Some of you may remember Virginia Hanson. I'm the kind that read the directions, and while I was reading it, Virginia had it put together, whatever it was. He's going to continue to straighten that, and I'm going to continue to move it. Sorry, Peter, it keeps you active. So there's learning by doing. Consider this statement by the well-known physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Contrary to the strict division of the activity of the human spirit into separate departments, a division prevailing since the 19th century, I consider the ambition of overcoming opposites, including also a synthesis embracing both rational understanding and the mystical experience of unity, to be the mythos, spoken or unspoken, of our present day and age.
Read it again.
Yes. Contrary to the strict division of the activity of the human spirit into separate departments, a division prevailing since the 19th century, I consider the ambition of overcoming opposites, including also a synthesis embracing both rational understanding and the mystical experience of unity, to be the mythos, spoken or unspoken, of our present day and age. So perhaps we can begin to realize that there is a reciprocal arrangement between conscious and unconscious that brings about a synthesis, a new mythos. Don't be surprised. I mean, after all, according to H.P. Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrine, we are supposed to awaken a new mode of knowing. This is presumably our responsibility. Instead of that, we sit back and we become second-hand and third-hand theosophists, repeating what's been. Someday we'll wake up and be first-hand theosophists like the Mahatmas. And you're not going to get to being a Mahatma. And I was going to say, yeah, anyway, by just sitting there and reading the books. It's going to make effort, and that's why I'm going to make you work this weekend.
Why is memory in the unconscious side here?
Pardon?
Why is memory in the unconscious side? Because I would have thought it had to be conscious, otherwise you didn't have the memory.
We bring, because we file it away and then we bring it into conscious. Each one of these has to be brought into conscious. We'll look at that in a moment, yes. But you just file it away. And all of a sudden, the answer comes, doesn't it? I can't remember your name, and so I file it away. No, you don't. Well, after a while, I finally say, what is your name? And you say, Rose. And I say, oh, of course, I remember now. I knew that all along, you see. But if you don't tell me, then after a while, something comes along, and I remember. So it's a kind of unconscious activity of the mind, memory, you see? So what we're after now is this synthesis, which in a sense is the new mode of knowing. A new mode of knowing which combines conscious and unconscious, combines rational and non-rational, or as Pauli put it, combines the rational and the mystical experience into, well, all right, we'll call it intuition. But I don't think that's exactly it. I think there's something else. And I'm still struggling with the word to see if we can discover it.
The word mythos is the problem.
Yes, the word mythos is the whole. It is the new mythos. And this will be the new mythos that we're moving towards. In fact, the American philosopher and mystic Franklin Merrill Wolff has proposed a way of knowing that he considers a third way, a latent function of consciousness. And it's a very interesting, I find one of these that works well after a while. Anyway, you can see it. And he calls it, by an interesting word, introception. Introception, which combines both a latent function of consciousness beyond the unconscious sense perception and conceptual cognition. Introception. Is that a nice word? Introception. And Merrill Wolff defines it as the power whereby the light of consciousness turns upon itself toward its source. Introception. And he suggests that when this happens, objects disappear. We could say, therefore, that intuition and creativity may simply be terms that refer to occasions when such introception takes place and a new kind of knowing is made accessible to consciousness. So can we perhaps adopt that term, introception? The power whereby the light of consciousness turns upon itself toward its source. Now, of course, we can add other modes of knowing. Sometime during the weekend, we're going to look at the symbolic mode of knowing. So symbolism, it has been said, is the language of the soul. The symbolic mode of knowing. Consider dreams and the symbols that arise. It's been said that by means of symbols, the soul communicates with its own deepest nature. That such communicating is the most important duty one owes to oneself. So we're going to examine during the course of the weekend this symbolic mode of knowing. Now, in many ways we could approach this. And in one sense, what I'm talking about, so just to take this off, we'll start again. Because maybe this has just gotten you exploring, and you'd like some good old basic theosophy. Is that right? That's what you came for. Well, we'll look at that. Now, a lot is said in theosophy. No, I'll put it this way. A lot is said by theosophists, which is a lot of nonsense. Probably what I'm saying is a lot of nonsense, too. About the mind. We always get hung up on this question of the mind. And of course, we all know the mind is the slayer of the real. You ever heard that? Oh, yes, every theosophist can repeat it. I have no idea what it means, but that's all right. Repeat it. Let the slayer slay. Let the disciple slay the slayer. Well, if you read the rest of the Voice of the Silence, you find that the whole Voice of the Silence is devoted to what? The training of the mind. All right, Wanda?
It's a while since I read it.
Yeah. I'll go back and read it one day. Worth reading. So what's being said? The central focus of our human life wave, I'm not going to explain what a life wave is, but presumably we're all human beings here, I hope. The central focus is manas. Why? Why? Because the whole system, if you don't believe me, read The Secret Doctrine. It'll take you a couple of hours, but that's all right. According to the Theosophical Metaphysic, the whole system is rooted in what? Gavin? The whole system is rooted in consciousness. Don't ever forget that. The whole system, everything is conscious through and through. Intelligence came first. The universal mind, if you like. Mahat. It is illumined from within. All right, you all like Sanskrit. It's Chidakasha. Have you ever heard of that? It is knowingness at the very root of everything. We would not have minds if there were not the consciousness in which we are rooted. Is that right, Vlad?
I think so. Getting close.
You're getting close. I'm getting close. Getting close. Good. If I can get close to whatever it is Vlad says, then I really have it made. Because underlying the whole system is universal mind. So here is the focus, is manas. All right. Now, what uses manas, what uses it, what operates through it, is indeed that, well, we call it a nice convenient term, the monad, if you like. I'll give you some nice Sanskrit terms you might as well. You're all familiar with them. You feel, now I'm getting down to something I know. You don't know anything about it, but that's all right. You think you do. Is that right, Hazel? I think you do. Which uses manas.
So the important thing is to know the jargon.
To know the jargon. Yeah, that's right. Because,
That's
so
what I'm
that's why I throw it in now and then. This universal mind can be called Mahat, Chidakasha, all sorts of things. Its various aspects. All right. It is used then by that central focus through which the universe now particularizes itself. It's a nice way of putting it, isn't it? That focus through which the universe, universal consciousness, particularizes itself, which we call the monad. But for the monad to be active, if you don't believe me, read the secret document, read the Mahatma letters. I'm not saying anything that isn't there, believe it or not. I'm not saying anything that isn't there. Particularizes itself, and therefore is activated by that principle in the universal consciousness, which is called manas, which we just translate as mind. But this is our only access to all fields of existence. This is our only access to all fields of existence. And so, well, we can look at it another point of view, from another point of view. When H.P. Blavatsky defined the nature of a Mahatma, that is to say, a master of the wisdom, an adept. And when they defined themselves in the Mahatma letters, if you're not familiar with the Mahatma letters, read those. If you haven't read them for a while, read them again. Fascinating. Marvelous material. What is pointed out by H.P. Blavatsky is that a Mahatma is one in whom the total manas is awake. The total manas. Our problem, of course, is rather than energized, I'm going to put this a little bit differently. Energized by the principle that comes awake in us, it is drawn outwards by kama, passion, desire, into the objective realm. Vitalized in all sorts of ways, into the objective, physical if you like, and the etheric and all of that. I'm not going to get into all of that sort of thing. But our focus is here at Manas. To know who was the Buddha, the one who was awake. That's all it means. The one who was awake. Because Manas was total. This is why the great question that is asked in the Upanishads, in the Bhagavad Gita. What is that knowing which all else is known? When you can answer that, what is that knowing which all else is known? Never lose sight of that question. That is the ultimate question. When you answer that, you are Buddha. Because knowing that, everything in the phenomenal world, everything in the noumenal world is known. Now that's the aim. That's the whole aim and purpose of human evolution. Is to answer that question. The fact that Gautama answered it is an indication that if one of our race could answer it, every one of us can answer it. That's the example of the Buddha. Not to say, well, he found the answer, now I can just sit back and so. But the aim is, because it is said that he was the first of our human life way to achieve enlightenment. Sounds like a wonderful state, I'm enlightened. No, he was awake. He was awake, that's all. He was simply awake. Awake to everything. And saw, therefore, what is that? Knowing which all else is known. And the fact that he achieved is an indication that every single monad, every individual on this journey we call the human journey can also come awake. So it is only at Manas that our human life wave can come awake. This is the focal point. We talk about the 7 principles. There is one principle, only one principle. Forget about the other 6. There's really only one focal point. I may be rewriting theosophical texts, but that's all right. But there is only one principle, and that is the particularization of the universal consciousness through Manas for our human life wave. And when Manas is whole, entire, awake in its totality, this is the condition of Buddha. Never forget that. Which is compassion, which is caring, which is genuine love, which is knowing. And it's very interesting. In the original Hebrew of the Old Testament, to know is to love. The words are the same. Adam knew Eve. To know is to love. That is the characteristic of our human life wave. So often we translate Buddha as compassion, as discriminative wisdom. It is that, it's discriminative wisdom, it's intuition. But I'm getting away from the word intuition because we put, I think, more emphasis on the wishing than on the knowing. So what I'm trying to get across is that what we are focused at, incidentally, this is why HPB in Isis Unveiled, for example, referred to the Pauline classification. Spirit, if you like, at this level. But spirit is a vague, amorphous kind of generality, focused only, particularized as the monad, but spirit, which is the breath, which is Atman, means the same thing. Spiritus, Atman, to breathe. The entire system pulsates, breathes. This is, its very nature is spirit, is breathing. You are breathing, I hope. That is the representative in you of that immortal Atman. Energized then by a power which has the ability to wake you up, which is Buddha. But what is it that comes awake? Soul. This bothersome soul. You don't quite know where to put it. But which comes awake through then an energy, which is the energy of the psyche, as we'll see, through bodies. So here the energy is, if you like, you feel comfortable with the term buddhi, and here the energy is the psyche. But it is at this level. It's a wonderful statement by great English poet John Keats. You may not know how great an occultist Keats was. This is his statement. Do you not see how necessary a world of pains and troubles is to school an intelligence and make it a soul, a place where the heart must feel and suffer in 1,000 diverse ways. That's John Keats, great English mystic poet. Do you not see how necessary a world of pains and troubles is to school an intelligence and make it a soul? A place where the heart must feel and suffer in 1,000 diverse ways. This is the realm of samsara. This is the realm of experience. Here's where we confront all of the challenges, don't we? A world of pains and troubles. This is the condition of which the Buddha spoke in the first noble truth, dukkha, which we usually just translate as suffering. It means so much more than that. Any ignorant peasant toiling in the midday sun of India, on the plains of India, could have told you life is suffering. You didn't have to sit under a bo tree and achieve enlightenment to know that. The first noble truth of the Buddha, dukkha. Everything is only an approximation. Everything is moving, is transient, is unsatisfactory. All of that is contained in that wonderful word dukkha. That's the first noble truth. Everything is only an approximation to the real. It is unsatisfactory. And if you tend to cling to it, if you tend to hold on to it, it goes. It's transient. There is no abiding nature in anything in the realm of thingness. We're going to come to that after a bit in terms of language. Because we tend to make everything into things. This is a glass. That's water in the glass. Is that water? It's a word. This is a table. Nothing endures. Everything is unsatisfactory. That's the first noble truth. But it has its purpose. It's brought about by desire, which is the second noble truth. I'm not going to teach you about Buddhism. That's not my point. So HPB tells us, if you don't believe me, you can read that. But isn't that a beautiful statement by Keats? To school an intelligence and make it a soul. We are in the business, my dear friends, of soul making. Not interesting. That is our business, is soul making. When we've learned how to make a soul, maybe we'll be spiritual. But I think we want to be spiritual without having really schooled the intelligence, that is, schooled manas, and made it into a soul. All right. Do we have tea? Oh, it's almost time for the morning tea. Oh, goodness. Ooh, more than I expected. So what does HPB tell us? She tells us in the Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, somewhere along in there. I didn't bring the exact reference. You can look it up. There's nothing yet better to do this evening. You can look it up. She tells us there are 3 schemes of evolution. Did you ever hear of that? 3 schemes of evolution, which she says are interwoven and interblended at this stage at every point. And so she calls them the monadic or spiritual, the intellectual, or monastic, or as she calls it, and the psycho-etheric, or physical. So these are the three streams of evolution. So you see what I've been saying is not outside of HPB, it's not outside of the secret doctrine. I've just been putting it a little bit differently than you may be used to be putting it. And, says she, the whole focus is here, which is why I say this is our central principle. It is the principle for the human life wave. And all the other areas of experience are subsidiary to it. So when we talk about the 7 principles, there's a nice convenient way to get you into introductory theosophy, and every course gets you into that and so on. And there they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and if you start listing them, you'll probably come out with 8 or 10 or 20, or maybe 5 or 3, and so on. Nobody ever quite agrees on them. And so we have all different kinds of classifications. And you can read every book, and you've got a different classification in all of them. All right? So I'm giving you the accurate classification. Text according to Joy Mills. All right, let's go and have tea.